Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Right Time, a Wave original. My name is Bomani Jones. Thanks for listening wherever you get your podcast. Thanks for watching us on YouTube. Subscribe, like, rate us, review us, give us 5 stars. You only give us 4 stars. I'm inclined to believe you are a hater. All right, we have got a guest joining us this time. I want to introduce you to her. Her resume is kind of wild, man. We got she's the director of the Prime Video documentary Reggie on Reggie Jackson that I need to see and I have not seen. She also did a documentary series on a book, well, what was a book called How Music Got Free, which I have read, but I did not know there was a documentary. So I'm really looking forward to check this out. And as is germane to this here program, she's the director of Sean Combs' The Reckoning on Netflix, the Diddy documentary. Her name is Alexandra Stapleton. Alexandra, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
No, hey man, we gotta, whenever we can have Houston people doing, dope things for the city, like we are totally here for this. We got a hater named Joel who listens to the show, who was gonna be our backup Diddy guest. So Houston is holding this all the way down. But I have so many questions about this documentary. I've talked about it on the show. I recommend to people watch it, check it out. I think it is very interesting. I think the first question I have is really kind of chronologically to me, what I imagine for you is the first step of the process, which is at some point there's a phone call from 50 Cent who says, I want to do this documentary about this guy that I don't really like that much. And I'm very curious how that goes on your end when you receive this call.
Well, it wasn't as fantastical as that. 50 and I, had met earlier actually through Eminem on How Music Got Free. Eminem was a executive producer on that project. And so prior to Cassie's lawsuit dropping, we actually were working on other projects, other documentary projects with G-Unit and my company, House of Nonfiction. And so we were developing things, and then the lawsuit dropped, Cassie's lawsuit. And of course, that went everywhere, rapid pace. We didn't talk about it on that day, but I just wanted to wrap my head around, is there a story here? I mean, it immediately was very fascinating to me. And then she settled, and then it kind of like the light went out, and it was like, wait a minute, you just dropped a bunch of knowledge, a bunch of allegations. And so I just, started trying to find other leads and other ways to potentially look under the hood of that story. And, simultaneously, 50 was public about wanting to do a documentary series or a doc about the same subject matter. So then we linked up and spoke about it. And we had a really long conversation. It was actually he knows my filmmaking style, and that, for me, there was no conversation about like, how do we create, a BS piece of content just for some sort of, like thing that had nothing to do with the allegations. The goal was to talk about, the subject matter and to understand and unpack like how complex and nuanced and just it was going to be a really heavy conversation.
Now, executive producer in this industry is a very broad term. So what was his involvement in the actual production?
Well, he's been really public about that in interviews that we've done together. He was definitely, as we were putting the pieces together, because everyone has to remember this is before there was any indictment. This is before the raid. This is all that was actually really out there was this lawsuit. So, and trying to talk to people and get people to open up to me, 50's involvement as a figure of the culture and someone who makes a project feel like this is going to go. This isn't just some, random filmmaker who's going to come and collect knowledge and give, because there was a lot of paranoia in that time frame where people felt very scared to talk to anybody because they didn't know if what they were saying was going to be confidential, or was it going to just be put on social media. So there was a credibility, I think factor with 50 being attached to this. And we both really felt that in telling the story, we didn't want to destroy the culture of hip hop, through the allegations of one man. So that was one component, in getting certain people to the table. And there's obviously voices in there of people that love Sean and are very much, speaking in his defense. So that was not, that really did not have anything to do with 50. And then as the project, went on, I would share, when I got to rough cuts, I would start sharing it with him and would get his feedback. And, he's put it out there that we would talk about things. He, had feedback and suggestions, and I either adopted it or I didn't, but it was usually more about the filmmaking, not like, let's cut this story point. We never got into conversations about that. It was just like, oh, this part flows, or, he has a lot of skill. Obviously, he's a man who's been making content for over a decade, and his narrative skill making, what he does in the narrative space is tremendous. And so I think that people forget that he's an amazing storyteller in his own right.
Right now, this is an ambitious project to jump on for a lot of the reasons that you discussed, but also, as you mentioned, not wanting to make this an attack on the culture of hip hop, but at the same time, the culture of hip hop is a major character in the totality of this. So, when you started doing this, did you have an idea in mind about how you wanted to address the culture and the industry surrounding versus just the story from the lawsuit?
Well, whenever I approach a story, there's always the macro and the micro. Like, that's always like, I literally, usually start with a list for each. Here's the big context, and here's the story of, characters or one character. And for this, it was a dance. I only had 4 hours. And so, of course, when I started this, I wanted to go deeper. I wanted to understand, the patterns of this type of behavior that predate Sean Combs, because allegations like this don't just start with Sean Combs. This is, there's a lot of history in the music business just as a whole with similar allegations and abuses. And so but as you start to put something together, you realize, in telling his story, and also what was available to me, because there are a lot of people that would not sit with me, and I can't just make things up. I can't just, like, there's no narrator, and I'm not just going to read from, books or articles. Like, I actually need firsthand accounts of things. So um I have to kind of pivot as a documentarian as to, like, making a piece based on the people that are sitting with me. And that is kind of like where you see and how you see the series shaping up. And it very much became more of an intimate portrait about Sean, and the ecosystem that he came into, because people also forget that hip hop was a really small community at that time period. Everyone kind of knew each other, especially in the streets of New York, And uh, so I just, I used the time that I had with 4 episodes to really make that make sense. And then, so that when you understand what he did in creating Bad Boy, you would have context to that. And then even when we get into, the East Coast, West Coast, I say that like this,
Right.
that you understand that for so long, I think that that's always been treated like, oh, LA is a different world, a different, these are people that didn't even know each other. And it was really important for me to break down, no, these, Suge Knight goes all the way back to Uptown. That's where he learns, like, the music business, like, and that these are relationships that were really, really deep.
Yeah. And so, in only having 4 hours and truly covering a span of time, I mean, Sean Combs' life is almost 60 years, but I think it's fair to say we're really talking about a span of 30 years is really
Mhm.
getting into this, right? Early 90s into the early 2020s.
Mhm.
Only having 4 episodes and with some pretty, like, clear hallmarks to get to. Like, episode 2 really is largely 1995 to 1996, right? Like, is that
Yeah.
kind of time period. How did you figure out or decide, how do you allocate the time? Because it's not even like you can just say, okay, we've gone this far in time, we stop the episode. Every episode has to stop, have not just a point of stopping, but a stopping point that lets you resume.
Mhm. I think that, that getting in and out of the hours was less about being measured with the timeline. Oh, we did, this is 10 years, this is 10 years, and this will be 10 years, or 5 or whatever. It was more about breaking it down for story, for people to understand the journey of, Sean Combs. And so the first episode is sort of like all the way up through, the creation of Bad Boy. And so you're ending that note with like, okay, we tried to put out there, what did he learn, what did he adopt, what was happening, the fact that he came from party promoting and how he used and parlayed those skills into the label. But along the way, as we were tracking his progress, with what he actually did contribute to hip hop, which is extraordinary, uh, there was also like kind of like under the hood, what were these allegations that were happening. And I think that when, again, starting this with Cassie's lawsuit, I think there were a lot of people that, because this is hitting so many different age groups. So for me, I grew up with all this stuff, like, but, there's Gen Zers who like, they know Sean Combs just as like making the band. That's where he starts in the story. So I wanted to just kind of go back enough to get people to understand sort of like his origin story. But as we're doing that, to unpack, allegations that were coming out, as I was making it, and to kind of understand that was, it predated Cassie.
So the what he contributed to hip hop, I actually think is an interesting part, and where as I watch it, I kind of go back and forth because I see things that he helped to make bigger, but it feels like to me at least, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, just about everything that he contributed was something that somebody else had done already.
I mean, I there that's a way of looking at it. I think it does take a certain, like it takes a lot of energy to create and to run a record label. I mean, I think we could all,
Yes.
to run a business like that is a big Herculean feat. And he was so young to do it. You know what I mean? So I think that just in the creation of that, and that's also why Kirk Burroughs' story, again, was so important, because I think there was a little bit of the myth of like he was all by himself, and that also became important, when talking about Bad Boy. Well, it wasn't just Sean Combs, it was, this group of women and men, because, and I mean, they were so young and spirited, and they were really putting their mark, on a culture that was still being developed. So, you could take it like that, or you could look at, creating an empire that is a part of the work that was needed, to create the vessel, and the machine for all of these things to operate in.
So one of the things that we get to early in this is the infamous celebrity basketball game at CCNY that turned into a disaster with multiple people being trampled. I admit, until the documentary, I don't think I appreciated the magnitude of what a big deal that game was. Like, I'm curious for you if that's one of the things that when you got into this, you were like, oh, I knew this happened, but not necessarily. Like, I didn't think I had one rapper who participated in the game hit me up. I was like, oh, wow, he was there. I had somebody else who said this, and it was like, I just thought that this was like those celebrity games when I was in college that would just pop up, and they were just like, oh, okay, it's a celebrity game, and it's the dude who did After 12 Before 6 and his partners, and they playing basketball. This was a thing in New York City.
Yes, and I that's exactly how I felt. I had heard about it, but reading about it or hearing about it or hearing it, mentioned in articles, is very different than when we started getting the footage in. And actually, I mean, there's so much more footage that exists, and I think that to just sit in that and to see the aftermath of that and to really understand how the unbelievable tragedy of that, and that there were 9 people that were unalived, the 9 people that lost their lives so young. And then, the all just, it's a very traumatic event, I'm sure, to survive it, but to be witness to it. And so, I think it was really, really interesting, to even, I was very blown away of just seeing Sean, in that footage, and just looking, like it just felt like kind of like what you would imagine like a war zone to be or something, just like this incredible tragedy and all these people around you. And he just looked so lost and dumbfounded. And so I think that, that's a part of making documentaries, is like when you actually have the footage, all of a sudden the experience becomes more visceral in the storytelling.
And that footage is One thing, and I want to talk to you as we go along more about like the use of footage that is jarring, because it was very jarring, like to see the pictures of people on the ground in the gym with the blankets over them and all of that. What struck me though was watching when Combs is talking to the press, and he's giving his story about, which I thought was an amazing piece of game. The only thing that matters is making sure this never happens again. Like you wasn't there, right? Like this has absolutely nothing to do with you. And I think it was the first moment when I watched him there that I said to myself, and it continued, there are some people who I know who are around who have tried to make the argument that, like, oh, when he was Puffy, he was one guy, and then he became Diddy, and he was another guy. But I watched that and was like, oh no, this seems like this has been the same guy the whole way through. Just a lot of us on the outside weren't wise, but it seemed to be pretty constant. Like there's no inflection point in his voyage where he becomes a different person, just one in different circumstances.
Um, yeah, his reaction to that, I thought it was really important to include in the film because it's kind of his first, it's his entree to the press. It's his debutante to to the world beyond, what he had created already with party promoting. And, he's still a very low level, employee of Uptown. This isn't even like, an executive like who's doing this. I think that, and for him to get a press conference, and to know how to handle that and what to say and to kind of, be very, even like the tenor of his voice, I found to be interesting, and how you can hear, how he speaks, and then when you start putting these pieces together and the timeline together, it feels it you're like, oh, that reminds me of 1991, so I find it to be very interesting. I also feel like the reaction of him, by Andre Harrell not being fired and being able to continue to like blast off with his career, was also just just something interesting to see.
The Andre Harrell part I also thought was interesting because most of us who are like of a certain age know the Uptown story and the fact that he worked with Andre. One thing that I found to be very interesting, and it was kind of subtle in this, is I felt the doc subtly made the point that while there are some things that are very particular to Puff, but it's also kind of the world that he came from. And one of them we talked about, well, at Uptown, they found a way to make sure you didn't get anything other than your advance. And that's what Puff learned. And yes, that's about him, but that also speaks to the larger industry. And I found
Absolutely.
that to be an interesting part of the documentary is those things about him where it is also made clear though that this isn't the only guy who did it, right? Like we go back to Barry Gordy if we wanted to.
You can go back to the 1930, to the creation of,
Yes.
I mean, the creation of the music business and selling records has gone hand in hand with exploiting artists, and I wish that I had more time, to go. I mean, of course, like I there's so much more to go into, and maybe there'll be, maybe this raises an eyebrow for more people, more filmmakers, or more journalists to go and get into those stories. But yeah, that none of that part of, I think, the allegations against Sean, artists who have felt chronically exploited by him. No, Sean Combs did not start that,
Right.
at all, and he that just, I think, especially back then, I think it was just the way the business worked. There's no policing of the music industry, at a big level. It's so different now how corporate, things work. But yeah, it did not start with him.
Yeah, like Barry Gordy's story always was, I use the same contract as MGM, right? Like I take the exact same one. But as we get past that point, after we go to the break in a few, I want to talk more about Tupac. But first, I wanted to talk one thing that I think is interesting when you start getting into the era of Bad Boy is now, as we're talking about, we are getting into his relationships with the artists that he had. And you prominently feature Mark Curry in his documentary, who has a book called Dance with the Devil that I think people should read. I checked that a few years ago. And he was one of the first people to make the point that everybody who worked with Puff ended up dead in jail or in church, which was a big one in terms of where he drives people. What was it like for you to do these interviews with people who were actually affected? Because I don't know if anybody was affected more than Curry was. Like it comes out in his face and everything he talks about on screen.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot, that went into that. I think that, there was a design to that where I wanted to talk to people that could speak beyond just, I wanted to speak with people that had kind of been trying to put this on the map for a very long time, because I knew that there would be, um, in watching this, that people might feel like, oh, well, you're just, you just came and spoke out against Sean Combs to pile on and post Cassie's lawsuit. And, in starting to unpack and investigate and doing the research, I realized there were quite a few people that were kind of sounding the alarm, for various different reasons. And Mark Curry was one of those people. He wrote a whole book about his time with Bad Boy. But, Mark Curry also has like a very interesting kind of place in the story where he had so much time in Atlanta. He, had time. He knew the LA, dudes that were kind of a part of the story. And he knew New York because he's got family ties to all these worlds. So that started to become really, that started to hit for me, that I was like, oh, this is bigger than just Harlem or Mount Vernon. Like the story of Sean Combs, you can't tell it without kind of getting into Atlanta, without getting into Los Angeles, and understanding how all these worlds were kind of, moving together.
Right. And as I say, I think Curry may have been the artist most affected, but I think Kirk Burroughs, who was Diddy's partner in Bad Boy, obviously seems to be the most affected person. And I ask about him because since the film has come out, some of the things that he alleged, we've seen pushback from people. The idea that Diddy made the Biggie's funeral a recoupable expense, for example, and questions as to whether or not that happens. For you, what is the process of verifying something that comes from interviews like the ones with Burroughs, who seem to have a lot of information that he would have access to that most people would not?
Well, when things are a part of a lawsuit, and when we also, ask for comment, from with these allegations, that's a part of journalism, and the interesting thing about Kirk is that he's made repeated claims, again, going all the way back to 2003. At that time period, he was just like laughed out the courthouse, essentially. And then, that kind of, his lawsuit like went into, it kind of like kickstarted a whole bunch of other things, in for him. But I felt like this is interesting to see a man who keeps going back with the same, claims. Essentially, there's some additional things in the new suit that he has, but that was very much a part of the story. And then obviously, I talked to him. There's a million people that I have spoken with off the record, that are not in the film. And then you start to understand Kirk's position from other people, and what he was around doing at the time. All I can say with the pushback of the things that he is alleging, in his civil suit, would be for people to look at who's saying those things, and to do the work of, to do the work of understanding where that pushback is coming from. I think that's a part of the responsibility before, it just goes just goes crazy and you're just believing, anything. And then of course, like, everyone has a right to come forward with, a pushback, other evidence. But I think it's a complicated matter. Kirk, you're getting into like a lot of technical things about how records are kept, what his position was, and there weren't a lot of people like around, doing that. So to even break down like how the funeral would have potentially been a part of recoupment, that's a whole hour, that's a whole course, of understanding that. So it's a lot more complex than I think, than the chatter, around it.
You touched on something there that I think was interesting, which is the idea that when Burroughs filed this suit in '03, that he was kind of laughed out. And it's interesting how many things with Diddy that got laughed away in spite of the things that we knew actually factually happened. So, for example, we knew that he beat up Steve Stout with a champagne bottle. Like we knew that this thing happened, Later, this is not in the film, obviously, but like the example of him swinging a kettlebell at the strength coach at UCLA. Like, we have examples of a lot of really wild things that he had done, yet somehow we laughed off things that people alleged. And it wasn't as though, like, we don't think he could do such a thing. We knew he could. What did you come away from feeling in doing this movie? Like, how it was possible that these things could be known, but also be dismissed almost in the same breath?
I think that, it taps into like what the bigger message of the series was for me. And the bigger message was that this is a story that is bigger than Sean Combs. Actually, what I was trying to do was to turn the mirror on us as a public as to what we accept, dismiss. Oh, we just let's make a couple of jokes about it, let it go, or oh damn, that was effed up. But whatever. Where is the public's threshold of holding people with positions of power and fame accountable?
Gotcha. All right. Coming up next, we're going to talk about the Tupac and Biggie Chronicles from Sean Combs' The Reckoning. It's the holiday season, and it's time to make dreams come true. To make these holiday favorites, it takes a team of talented people, from actors to editors to props people to sound crew and more. And when it comes to building such a team, whether it's for the entertainment industry or a wide range of other industries, you need to hire the right people. The best way to do that is with ZipRecruiter. And right now, you can try it for free at ziprecruiter.com/Bomani. You can find out right away how many job seekers in your area are qualified for your role. With ZipRecruiter's advanced resume database, you can instantly unlock top candidates' contact info. Make your hiring a little merrier with ZipRecruiter. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. Just go to this exclusive web address right now to try ZipRecruiter for free. ZipRecruiter.com/Bomani. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/Bomani. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, we are back with Alex Stapleton, director of Sean Combs' The Reckoning. There's kind of no easy way to ease into this. I watched the documentary and came away from it feeling something that I had never really felt before, which is it seems entirely possible that Diddy had Tupac killed. That the relationship that he had with, not if only circumstantial, with whatever happened in Las Vegas in September of 1996. Did you go into that learning learning what you saw, or is that something that when you began formulating this film is like, oh, okay, I think this is something we'll talk about?
I did not see that getting into Tupac's tragic death is something that happened, organically. And I didn't have a clear understanding of like how much time or what that we were going to give. I definitely wanted to make sure that I was opening up more of the backstory that led up to those events, and I felt like the club shooting in Atlanta, so just some of the back and forth that was going on, even like I said earlier, really getting people to understand that there was a relationship that existed, or that Sean and Suge knew each other, and that Pac knew Biggie and Sean, that these were all relationships of people that were familiar with each other, even if they weren't all friends. And so, I think it's interesting that if the takeaway of this is the takeaway of this, but what became important to me was that when I had all of the proffer tapes and all of this, law enforcement material, that I thought it was important to just let it speak for itself. Keefe D is the person that is alleging this. Keefe D is the person who repeatedly, has kind of said the same story. And Keefe D is currently in jail awaiting trial for the murder of Tupac. So I felt like as someone covering the story, he is involving, Sean and putting him into the story, and how could that be overlooked? And so I felt like, if I'm going to do this, then we kind of have to unpack it so that by the time Keefe starts speaking on it, you kind of understand who all the players are that he's alleging that were involved in the story.
Yeah, and how was it for you as a process balancing his claims? Because he is not the most reliable narrator. Like we could not just have Keefe D speak on his own.
Um, we included interviews with law enforcement. We had a ton of files that were given to us for our own review, and that was backed up. And I think that the trial, like, this is everything that exists that we had, and now the trial will be the trial. Like that is where the legal the law will the legal system will take control of presenting, whatever happens with that. Of course, as the filmmaking team, we reached out, for comment, from from Sean, and did not hear anything, but did not get any response.
Yeah. And I think the film speaks to something that I don't think I had properly contextualized is this was really a Puff and Suge beef. As much, if not more, than it was a Tupac and Biggie beef. Like I remember the '95 Source Awards where Suge, all up in the videos dancing was the famous part. But I always remember from watching it when Diddy got to the microphone and he was all the way in the diffuse mode, and it always felt in watching like it was the gangsters on this side and this dude's just running a record label. But no, these guys actually seem pretty similar.
Well, it struck me as being very interesting whenever he has the public, and he's on the mic, when he has the podium, how he presents, himself. And that is there for people, to make to draw their own conclusions, too. It's constantly this paradox, right, of the public facing Sean Combs, and then the Sean Combs that is underneath, the hood, and like what's festering, what's brewing, and what's happening, behind closed doors.
And his preternatural ability to maximize any situation in the way that he looks at it. Example of that being after Biggie dies and it's time for a Rolling Stone cover. Like, actually, that's time for my Rolling Stone cover. And I'm about to put my album out after this. It's like at every turn, no matter what bad happened, he had somehow figured out how he was going to be the guy that came out on top.
I mean, everyone grieves differently.
That's well done. That's he definitely grieved in his own way. That is the way to put this. It did it in part after kind of in the timeline between Biggie dying. There is obviously the shooting at the club in Club New York that involved Shine, and goodness, I wish you could have gotten him to sit down because I mean he's over. Not he's a politician, he's a little bit over it, but boy, he used to be mad. There's almost it's not a gap in time between then and when we get to Cassie, but it seems like it felt like the goal of the film was to establish the person that may have then arisen by the time we get to kind of the late aughts in the early teens and his relationship with Cassie. But it does seem that it's like the line from The Wire, the game didn't change, it just got more fierce. It does seem that by the time you get to the end of that, he was the same person all the time, but there definitely seemed to be, it felt darker and more sinister. Like, is that kind of how you felt in terms of putting the story together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a story as old as time, right? What happens when you have more access to power, more access to money, you, you being able to control your narrative, it becomes, like, that there becomes a machine that's like hard to penetrate or to alter. And this is also, again, happening. I think what's really fascinating is a lot of the story takes place before social media was like at play, or where people could, like, just put up their cell phone and record, someone doing a bad deed, at a club or whatever. So it was so much easier, I feel like, back then, to sweep things underneath the rug, and to sort of also control legacy media, or to control outlets, that were reporting on stuff, to get people to sway, and to kind of keep your brand tight. And so I think that it was just the perfect storm for him. I always like think of like I did this film called Shut Up and Dribble, the series called Shut Up and Dribble, and Scoop Jackson was like, Michael Jordan is like it's like the perfect storm. Everything has to align right for Michael Jordan to be like Michael Jordan. Of course, he's a GOAT, right? But like Nike has to be where it's at. The NBA has to be where it's at. Chicago Bulls have to be where they're at. And then you have this player, and I think there's a similarity with that, especially in the 2000s, with Sean Combs. Again, maybe a bit darker in tone, as far as what was going on, with these allegations behind closed doors. But it's like this perfect storm of how he was in the middle of this like giant culture shift. All of these things happening. He's in the right place at the right time to link up with a liquor company, and everything happens. And he has the know-how to like start a clothing line. He's diversifying himself, but hip hop was also diversifying itself. And hip hop was, Steve Stout wrote the it was the tanning of America.
Yes.
Yeah. This is that time period, and all these guys were benefiting from that. But, the question becomes, as Sean was building those business opportunities, if with these allegations, it's like it was if the allegations are all true, it seems as though his ecosystem was also designed to kind of keep those things suppressed.
Right. Now, in expressing a lot of the ideas or telling the story, we talked about this a little earlier when we talked about the CCNY incident. You had access to a lot of truly jarring footage to sell a lot of these. You had access to footage from the murder of Biggie Smalls that we had not seen previously. Lil Rod and the pictures of the guy he allegedly got shot in the bathroom, for example. For you as filmmaker, was there a specific importance to use that, like the goal to, it's easy to kind of be like, oh, this is wild internet news, but like to make it such that no, these are real things that happen.
I mean, it goes back to when we were talking about why like CCNY hits you very hard. It when you have tangible footage, tangible, or even with Joy Dickerson reading a letter, when you have like these artifacts or art pieces of archival, it of course of course kind of puts what the person is saying and their allegations. It sort of gives you, it becomes a visceral like conversation, and there's just no, that's just, there's no denying that. And I think that so much of how Sean Combs is with, and I have to say I've never met him, spent a lot of time with him in the edit bay, but I think that he really comes, you start to understand how he speaks to people, how it's not, with the Little Rod voicemails, it's like, it's not, it's very interesting, the sort of way that he can kind of make you feel like $1 million, but like cut you and then make you feel like, don't ever ask me for anything. And I to do all of that in 30 seconds, like kind of have to hear it in order for it to in order to really understand, what Little Rod is even talking about. Otherwise, it seems like crazy. Like and most people don't work in the music industry. So they're like, you worked for a guy for a year and like how did you even do that? Like without getting paid? That right. is fantastical, to most people.
Yeah, no, I think we have a lot of questions for Lil Rod, and that is the first one that comes up. In watching this, obviously you had all this footage for Diddy, and you had this footage because he's one of those people who recorded himself all the time. And you just mentioned getting to know him at the edit bay. And I don't know really how to phrase the question, but I'm just curious, the experience of seeing somebody, like you just said, you got to know him even though you don't know him. Like that feels like a weird dystopian sort of thing to try to, like, however long you did this, it's like you were talking to the chat bot, but the chat bot was Diddy.
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel that way. I think my editors feel that way. My showrunner, the producer. I think we all you start to understand when you have so much footage, and there's so much footage that's not even in the film, right? Like, you start to see his like his gears, like there's the gear of being very performative and the bravado of like, I'm on camera and I'm gonna run this, this situation. And then there's, moments where you can feel like, oh, he forgot that the camera was there. Or, there's moments where I mean, I can even tell because this is a man who worked in reality television for a very long time. When you work in that space, you know how to turn it on and off when the cameras are rolling. And you also know that like, oh, this little thing over here that I don't want people to know about, I can cut that out. So if I let loose a little bit, I'm I'm gonna be okay. And you see all those gears at play, or we did, in making this. And I think that it almost felt like, as a filmmaker, it almost felt like I actually filmed him. But it's really just because of his quest to always be filming everything about his life.
So you have mentioned the extent that you and this production has gone through to protect the identity of the filmmaker from whom, where all this film came from. I ask you to clarify this because honestly, I feel silly almost asking, but doesn't Diddy know who was filming him all the time?
That's a question for Diddy.
There we go. I'll ask him next time I see him. Um, but in the end, it's interesting to hear you say that you viewed this as much as a mirror for the public to put before themselves and ask, how this happened. And I feel like a part of expressing that point was the jurors being present in the documentary. Were you surprised that they wanted to, or is this like I felt like when Ezra Edelman did OJ Made in America and he had the jurors, they had 20 years of being called basically stupid black people, and they felt like there was an explanation to be given. I didn't I was surprised that for this trial the jurors, especially so soon, would have wanted to have been a part of it. Did that surprise you at all?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I think it was it if you had to ask me like during the trial, like, oh, when this is all over, and of course we're going to do our reach out to try to find these jurors, are they going to say yes? I probably would have been like, fat chance, right? But it was such a similar to OJ's trial. It kind of, I feel like it started out pretty serious and it just kind of like became a circus, like the actual proceedings at the like outside of the courthouse, I guess I
Right.
could say. And I wouldn't say that the courtroom was a circus. But I feel like the jurors, there I just feel like there was a lot of adrenaline going, and I think that transferred potentially over to them. And for them, I think, I think they were very adamant to speak, to share, like, this is how we got to this verdict, and they felt very proud of their decision. um but it was just a curious, like, it was like a very interesting energy. And honestly, like, I spoke to more jurors. These were the two that we actually filmed with, but um there could have been more. I just we weren't really doing like the trial as like an episode.
Right.
um but and they all were very, not every single juror, but the jurors that I did speak with, they were totally fine and okay with being filmed.
Yeah, and I do think I came away like I think as unsettling as this line may have been for some people, I think there was something to it. But domestic violence was not one of the charges. Like I felt like I came away from it, and much like the OJ documentary. The OJ documentary, I came away with two thoughts. I came away more certain than ever that OJ killed those people, and more certain than ever that he should have been acquitted. Like as counterintuitive as that may seem, I felt in this also to a degree. Like I see why on those larger charges there was an acquittal. Was what you were doing at all an attempt to explain what the jurors may do or how the outcome came to be, or just a retelling of the events themselves?
I think it was giving their perspective, like a window into their perspective. I think beyond the actual verdict decision, I thought it was interesting, and especially because we were able to, I was able to secure an interview with Capricorn Clark. So I thought that it was interesting, um, to for me to sit down with Capricorn and to kind of understand like where she emotionally was, and I think that this was like a lot for her. I think this was also something that's very nuanced, but like Kirk Burroughs has had a couple of decades to kind of sort of be at peace with how he tells this story because there's so much time that has gone past. Capricorn kind of, I feel like for her, and I think it's a fair representation to say this, I feel like she was very surprised when Cassie's lawsuit dropped. That she was just thrust into like this the trial of the century, and she's a part of it, and she's a part of like a very big part of like a car bomb, and like this whole like crazy story, and she's in the center of that, and and she has like a very long relationship with both Cassie and Sean, in working with both of them. So it sort of was interesting because to me, when I'm interviewing people, it's like you can meet people where they are to understand, well, she's going to, a lot of this is very visceral for her, potentially even re-traumatizing her. So she may not be the perfect person in articulating herself at every minute on a stand. It was very interesting to hear the jurors' perspectives that kind of meant that they took that meant something different for them.
Right. And I think also in making this movie, something that I guess I think a lot of people know, but most people don't necessarily think about is there are no cameras in federal court, right? So
Correct.
we just get the weirdo pictures, right? The scribbles.
Very weirdo
Yeah,
picture.
they come out, and I would like that trial is so interesting because in the film, for example, like we got to see a lot of like the recreations of emails that were sent between Cassie and Diddy, and all these different things, and we would see them. But obviously, through no fault of your own, it feels like that's kind of the missing piece in this is to see what it was like in those moments, right? With him looking like Frederick Douglass because he can't get no shoe polish while he's in jail to touch his shit up. And then all these things are going on, and he's there. And at the end, he's on his knees. Like it's the wildest scene. And I can only imagine how jealous a filmmaker has to be that this is there and just can't get a hold of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's really frustrating because like going back to comparing it to the OJ trial, like I feel like OJ was televised, right? But the jurors
Yes.
were sequestered.
Yes. And this is the opposite.
So it's like that was that, and then this was like non-sequestered jurors, but no TVs in the courthouse. Very interesting. um, yeah, I think cameras being there I can only imagine like how the dynamic change would have been for better or for worse for Sean Combs. I'm not sure, but it would be really interesting if the public could have seen things. And yeah, the drawings it's almost like the drawings make it like even more not real.
Yeah.
Because like all of them. Like,
So, as we start to wrap this, I am terrible when people ask me the most or the biggest or whatever, but I am curious if there's anything that jumps out to you as being something really interesting to you that you came across in working on this that you had not known or were not aware of before you started working on this film.
oh man, I mean, there's a lot that I didn't know. I mean, as far as like just basic level facts, I mean, I think for me, like opening up, the second episode and like I said, really going back to the windy road of how all these people knew each other was really fascinating to me. I I should have a prepared answer for this because I like I feel like when I'm with 50, like he kind maybe he's been answering this more than me, but I think what probably the biggest thing that was that I had to grapple with was kind of a question that I asked myself, and it was a part of the reason as to why I started it, which was like, as a culture, this is going back to like, this is about us, right? As a community of people, in a post Me Too world, like when the egg is cracked open and we have, allegations like this, in the hip hop space, and in the hip hop community, like what will the reaction be? And I think that, um, you know, I think that like the film is kind of still asking the question of that. I don't think I'm giving. I cannot give that answer. I'm just a filmmaker, like. But what I do think is interesting is how I really. I thought that maybe I would be more we would have more of an ending by now, but it almost feels like this is the beginning of like a new chapter and new conversations and new ways to analyze, again, not just Sean Combs, but I hope that this really starts to lead into conversations about analyzing our legal system and, how we handle conversations about victims, how our legal system handles allegations, for victims. So yeah, it's just it's just a slice of time, a reflection piece, and yeah.
All right. That is Alexandra Stapleton. She is the director of Sean Combs' The Reckoning. I want to read some more of this stuff from your bio because everything in here is like, wow, this sounds really cool. You got a forthcoming documentary on Terrell Owens in partnership with Skydance that is coming. You directed one part of God Save Texas, The Price of Oil, a documentary series that HBO did. And we talked earlier about how music got free and Reggie Jackson. I got some things to go check, so I wanted to go let the other people know if they wanted to see more of your work, how they could get it. And I appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, and I got another. It's announcing today that.
Oh yes, Brittany Griner film.
So H-Town.
Yes, 2026 and on ESPN, the Brittany Griner film is coming. So I appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, no problem. And ladies and gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on The Right Time. We do this 4 times a week. Ryan Brumley handling everything behind the scenes. Thank you, sir. Remember, follow The Right Time. Also, hit the voicemail line, 323-596-7767. Subscribe, like, rate us, review us, give us 5 stars. You only give us 4 stars, I'm inclined to believe you are a hater. And we'll talk to you guys in a couple of days. Take it easy.